Welcome to the Wingate Way. This is a family weekend edition. Thank you for tuning in. In this episode, we had an amazing conversation with Dr. Frederick, Provost at Wingate University. We talked about his family, his upbringing. We talked about why he decided to choose Wingate as his next destination. We also talked about the path forward for us as a people, as an institution, and as a country in this tumultuous time that we are all facing. Tune in for this episode of the Wingate Way. Well, thank you very much. I don't know how much of the show you know, but we are very, very delighted to have you here today, especially in these unprecedented circumstances with COVID and everything else going on in the university and around the country. So thank you very much for being with us.
It's a pleasure to be here. It's a challenging time, a crazy time. We are reacting to all the uncertainty around us, but there are some things we can depend on. And so we celebrate those even as we wonder what tomorrow will be.
Well, we have to. So this is a family weekend edition of the Wingate Way. And I always feel that in order for us to truly understand people, it's important for them to take us back to where it all started. So tell us a little bit more about your family, your childhood, where you're from, and we can have a good understanding of who you are.
I grew up in Florida. I have an older brother and an older sister. Grew up in a household with two parents, so it was very fortunate and blessed and privileged to live in that environment. I grew up in and around Orlando area at a time when that city was just exploding with tourism and an updated airport and all sorts of interesting international flavor and just a really wonderful place to come of age in. So my roots are sort of in Florida. I did my doctoral work in Alabama at Auburn University, and then moved to North Carolina in 2003. So the majority of my life has been in different parts of the South. The more modern South in Orlando, the more traditional South in Auburn, Alabama in many ways, and then in North Carolina, which is an interesting blend of things old, new, and modern.
So you mentioned having two siblings. Where do you fall in that pecking order?
I'm the youngest, and yes, so benefited from watching their experiences, and I'm sure antagonized them all at the same time.
Well, I'm sure. I mean, I don't know much about the research, but the research seems to indicate that the young sibling typically forges a path of his own because he has his older brothers or siblings that have already taken everything else. So you have to find your own way and become your own person. Will you say it's true in your experience?
I think partially yes and partially no. I think we all benefit from the traditions of our family members who came before us that sort of help us, coach us up involuntarily. The holiday traditions we grew up in, the experiences that we all fall back on. Aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents, all of that coming together. But I think at a certain point in time, all of us end up making a decision to plot our own destiny.
Absolutely.
And so I don't know if that is easier if you're the youngest in the family or harder. I'll leave that to the social scientists.
I don't know much about the study either. So you just mentioned, plotting your own destiny. So speaking of destiny, did you always know you wanted to be in higher ed and that one day you might become a provost and all that? Was that always the plan?
I would say no. And I think that's one of the things that really college, when it succeeds, develops in us, the ability to figure out what we want to be. When I was an 18-year-old college freshman at the University of Central Florida, my first semester, I was a journalism and communications major. Got a part-time job working for the school paper. Thought I would go into some version of sports media. By my second semester, I had become, or my second year at least, I'd become a business major, specializing in marketing and doing some measure of computer science courses. And in fact, that's what my first degree was in. My bachelor's degree was in marketing. I worked in the corporate world for about 8 years. Went back to school. My wife took great pity on me when I said, I want to go back to school and go to grad school to study history, and she did not immediately dismiss me, much to her great credit. And because I felt like I had something to say, I felt like I was missing an opportunity to do some writing, maybe to do some teaching. So I got a master's degree in history, something I had not studied as an undergrad, and then went to Auburn University to get my PhD, specializing in Southern history. And for me, college started the process of creating some questions in my mind that had no answers. And some of that started as an undergrad, and then in my master's program and in my doctoral program, that really, really came out. So for me particularly, I wanted to study history because I could never learn it all. Every day I would fall another day behind. There would be more information from what just had transpired that I had to learn and put it into the larger context of the previous decades and centuries. So I was fascinated by that, and I was also particularly interested in the riddles and the mysteries of Southern history. How, as a group of Southerners, we seemingly should have so much in common with each other. You know, our love for family, grounded in faith, our sense of small town values, the sense of place that comes from living in an area where the land means so much to us. Yet, despite all of what should have been similarities that tied us together, historically we have created differences that separate one group from another. I wanted to unravel some of those mysteries and figure out why we did things like that really don't make much sense.
I think there's absolutely no way we cannot talk about Southern history without talking about some of the discrepancies that you are talking about. But there's something that you said earlier that I want to return to, and I'm going to put a pen on this bit about Southern history. But this idea of changing your major and choosing another career path, and I feel like that's something that our students, starting with, really wrestle with, this idea of this illusion that they have to know when they come to college what exactly they're going to be studying, what career path they will have, and it causes a lot of anxiety. So can you speak a little bit more to that in the context of our students and the level of anxiety that comes with realizing that something that you thought was going to be your trajectory, all of a sudden is no longer the case?
I think too often we view changing your major or shifting directions as something unusual. Gosh, I was supposed to do this and now I'm doing that. In fact, that is the typical story. The average college student changes their major 2 or more times. Who among us at age 18 had everything figured out? The brilliance of college is you're surrounded in a place with so many bright people, so many people who have found their own destiny, who have found their own mission, their own calling in a professional standpoint. And you're getting a chance to be exposed to all those worlds of ideas. At no other time in your life will you have the ability to study so many different things, to surround yourself with so many interesting ideas, so many interesting things to study. So it's not unusual to change your major. In fact, that is the most usual thing. So what I would say to all of our new students, what I would say to all of our family members is enjoy that process. Enjoy the uncertainty of the moment. Talk to different people. Take interesting courses. Our curriculum here has an opportunity to expose you to all sorts of interesting ideas. You can get a minor, that is to say you can specialize in something. And what employers are telling us is that your specific major is probably less connected to your career trajectory than at any time in American history. So you don't have to study a certain thing in most cases in order to work in a chosen field. It's more skill-based. What skills are you developing? Are you learning to write and communicate effectively? Are you a problem solver? Can you manage data? Can you sift data to find out what's most important and what's least important? Can you present your ideas digitally? Can you live in a global society where you have appreciation for both the similarities of you and your students or customers or employers, but also the differences that you have? Those are 21st century skills. And those are less dependent on a single major than they used to be. So enjoy the uncertainty. Take a course in an area that you might not sure you ever want to study again. Scratch those itches, check those boxes, and in the end, you'll find your passion.
I think, I know we just spend most of this answer talking about students, but, even during your professional career, you realized at some point that you were not quite as fulfilled as you could be. And once again, you decided to take a shift. And I think those moments when life demands our attention forces us to really stop sleepwalking or really living up to society's or parents or other people's expectations, are typically turning moments in our life, moments that we look back and really recognize that was a moment really that I call my origin story. That was my origin story. That's really when I became invested and involved in this life process. So you mentioned why you were so fascinated by Southern history, and part of that was really some of the inconsistencies that you talked about. Can you expand a little bit on these ideas and tell us a little bit what you found you can be attributed to those inconsistencies?
Let me just connect on one other thing real briefly, and then I'll jump into that. I think maybe we have origin stories as opposed to a story. My grandparents' generation, they probably worked for one or two different companies over the course of their life. My parents' generation, they probably worked for three or four. I will probably work for maybe a few more by the time I retire. In the current generation that are in college, they might work for 10 or more employers. They might start in one direction and then pivot somewhere else. So, and that's okay. That is a transition point of the world. We no longer drive our horses to work, and that's okay. That's a nice transition point. So other transition points are reasonable as well. So for me, studying Southern history allowed me to explore lots of different inconsistencies. So I've written and presented on politics and on governors, on civil rights, on race, on sports, on a variety of different things. I'm sort of envisioning a future project where I will write about food and how it relates to a variety of different things. But that's a classic example of finding new things to be interested in and pivoting to different points. Particularly for me, for Southern history, it was these inconsistencies that made me want to get deeper into it. Southerners historically, if you go back even to the 1600s, are among the most religious group of Americans. We are devout in our faith. We attend church, well, certainly in person in a non-pandemic world. One group of social science researchers have indicated that Southerners are more likely to read their Bible than most any other group. And of course, there's plenty of other religious expressions across the South today. We also, at that same time of being the most historically religious groups, often exhibit characteristics that would fly in the face of that. We have historically been among the most violent group of Americans. We are more likely to commit violent acts in many ways historically than most any other group of Americans, including in some cases violent acts related to family members. So how do you square those inconsistencies? We're the most devout and the most religious, yet at the same point in time, in many cases, we're the most violent. Those two things ought not to go together, but in some sense, they historically have. And so there are all these sorts of mysteries of how ordinary people have lived their lives that are really interesting to us. They're grounded in the particular time and space, the climate, the economy of the South, certainly the racial characteristics of where we've historically lived. And they all lead us to kind of finding why it is that we do and say the things we do. So for example, looking even deeper into those kinds of things, how many of us who regularly attend church have sat in the same pew for years, if not decades, if not centuries? That becomes sort of our space. So we are products of tradition, we are products of our culture, and even if some of those practices that we engage in don't always square one with another, it's who as Southerners we've become.
Luckily, we now know that our brains are plastic, meaning they can evolve, they can change, they can grow, they can atrophy. And so are cultures, right? So things that we take for granted today as being moral were not always the case. So what's the path forward for us as a species, for us as a country, and certainly for us as an institution?
Yeah, well, if I knew that, I would be in a really good shape to make some positive changes. I think we have to come to grips with the reality that we live in a global society, that diversity is not something that just happened and will go away. Diversity is who we are as a world. It has to be who we are as a society. It's certainly who we are as an institution. Have we always made the best choices over our existence since 1896? Well, probably not. But we are able to change. We are able to adapt. We are able to be more welcoming. This is an institution now where we want everyone to feel welcome, no matter who you are. We want everyone who comes here to feel like there's someone else who's just like them. We also want everyone who comes here to engage and experience someone who's not just like them, so that when you leave here with your degree and you're ready to go work in corporate America, or to go teach in a school, or to travel the world, or to be a nurse in a hospital, or to be a pharmacist who works in research or works in a retail location, whoever you see, you've already gone to school with them at Wingate. Maybe you lived down the hall from them. Maybe that person was your roommate. Maybe they were your lab partner. Maybe you were in an organization together. Maybe you were on the football team or the cross-country team or the volleyball team together. If we do that, if we make this institution a microcosm of what the world should look like, then whoever you are when you leave here, you're ready for a global world. You're ready for borders and boundaries in the world of commerce to mean less than they ever did. And that is probably our obligation as an institution, to live those values and to make sure that we're welcoming. It's not really a choice. It's a reality. The world has changed. Thank goodness. Now, how do we adapt to it? How do we adjust to it? How do we make everyone feel comfortable? At the same time, we're exposing each other, all of us, to people who are not just like us, so that we have an appreciation for someone who's different.
I mean, it's certainly this ability to cross over our imaginary and real boundaries is a crucial ingredient for the kind of world and the kind of future that we want to see for ourselves, for our children, and for the next generation. There's also an important piece, which is the ability for those who want to see that change happen, to voice their opinion, to take action. And I think that's part of what our students did this past weekend on Sunday it was. And I was so happy to see you there. What do you think a moment like that means for this institution? And what do you think is so important for our students to have that kind of agency, to want to be agents of the kind of change that they want to see for the institution, but also for the country?
What I appreciated most about Sunday was that this was student-led and student-driven, that students were coming together to let their voices be heard, to understand that the world is not functioning in the way that makes everyone safe and comfortable and able to reach all of their own goals. And they came together to look for a peaceful, thoughtful opportunity to make their voice heard. At the end of the march, people were telling their testimonies, they were praying, they were offering moments of silence, they were talking about what had happened in their own experiences, wherever they came from. That's meaningful in the fact that students are expressing themselves in a positive way about wanting the world to be a safer, better place. Often when we think of diversity, we focus on current issues, which of course revolve around African Americans and violence that has been practiced against them. But as an institutional perspective, we should remember that a diverse culture involves people of every gender, people of every orientation, people who express themselves in lots of different ways in terms of their religion, people who have military status, people who are of different ages. Undoubtedly, we have some lifelong learners on our campus taking classes. I want them to feel comfortable. And if you're listening out there and you want to come to school here, we welcome you, no matter what age you are. These are all examples of how we knit together into a perfect tapestry. You know, back to Southern history, one of the things that people collected for hundreds of years was scraps of fabric, scraps of material. You wouldn't just produce a garment, produce a dress, a suit of clothes, and throw the excess away. You'd keep it. Well, eventually, some of those fabrics, some of those fragments of cloth became knitted together in a quilt. And individually, they were all distinctive of different sizes and shapes and fabrics and patterns and textures. But when they came together, they became something greater than what they were individually. They became a quilt. They became a family heirloom. They became an example of self-taught art, of stitching together that design. And it became utilitarian. A quilt was a practical work of art that kept people warm in the winter and that kept their bed safe from anything that might rest on it. It was something greater than the individual fabrics that were together. And there was so much difference all represented in the quilt. I think that's not a bad example for us to think about.
I don't think so. One of the things that really makes me proud about this place is how it is constantly evolving and adapting and growing, self-reflecting. And I think that kind of self-reflection, that willingness to grow and to evolve and to adapt is going to be one of the things that we need in order for us to move forward.
The greatness of America as a country is not that we had all the answers from day one. It's that we understood that we were falling short of our potential and we made changes. Changes in the economy, changes in innovation, changes in technology, changes in society. There was a time where if you were a person of color, you could not vote. There was a time if you were a woman, you could not vote. And I would say even today in the 21st century, America doesn't have everything figured out. We don't have all of the answers. We're not a finished product. We're a work in progress. The greatness of the country is the ability to change and evolve and to get better. That's probably true of institutions as well. I can't think of any institution that was founded in 1896 that had everything figured out on day one. The greatness of the university is we've grown. We've grown over time. We've become more welcoming. We've added new programs. We went from a junior college to a college. We went from a college to a university. We went from a university that had bachelor's degrees to one that has master's and doctoral degrees. We are all a work in progress. And so the Wingate of 2020 is not a finished product. 5 years from now, if you have me back and we have another conversation, we'll be talking about all of what we've accomplished in the last 5 years, all of the ways in which the institution has changed, our demography of our students, the degree programs that we have. A Wingate student who comes here today, 4 years from now, may go change the world. You know, we all sort of watched this summer as John Lewis, one of the patriarchs of the civil rights movement, passed away. And so we have fought so hard to keep as much of the university open and available during this pandemic for interesting reasons. Because 4 years after John Lewis went away to college in Nashville, Tennessee, basically walking from rural Alabama to start it, he was in the middle of the civil rights movement. He goes to college, as I recall, in 1957. In 1963, on August 28th, he is giving a speech at the March on Washington. Now, we often refer to Martin Luther King's speech on that same day, but John Lewis was one of the opening speeches. John Lewis had an important role in civil rights activities like the Freedom Riders, in civil rights activities like the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. John Lewis starts a process of what we remember in 1965 in the march at the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama. But just a few years ago, he was a college freshman. So the transition between where you come as an 18-year-old and how you evolve and how you grow and change and how you can start making your mark so early in your life is a perfect example of what we're trying to produce. Students who find their passion, students who are prepared with skills, and they go take on the world. Now, they might not all change the world the way John Lewis did so shortly after he started as a college freshman, but that's why we're in the business of an education. We're in the business of a combination of co-curricular and extracurricular and student-based and classroom learning and internships and international experiences and this whole menu of opportunities so that a Wingate student who leaves here after 4 years with that degree is really prepared to go take on the world and change it. That's who we are. That's our core DNA. Now, were we there in 1896 from day one to have all of those programs and all of those different things? No. But in 5 years from now, we'll be even better. We'll be even different. We'll be doing more things. all along the lines of this is a place that can be a laboratory of difference making. So whatever your passion is, we feel like you can find it here. And then when you leave here, you're ready to take the values that you've learned here and then put them into your own new laboratory and go change the world.
As the provost here at Wingate, Wingate is relatively new to you. So how has that been so far for you and for your family? And how did Wingate even come to be? How did we get onto your radar?
You know, I had been on the other side of the state at UNC Pembroke for 17 years and had knew of Wingate and knew of all of what Wingate had accomplished, had known of the dynamic leadership that had historically been here, had known of Dr. Brown, and was really interested in having a conversation about whether some of the things that I believed in would be a really good fit here. And so got interested some years ago and sort of kept my eye on this as potentially a place where I would be interested in if there was ever an opportunity. And lo and behold, it worked. And ever since I've hit the ground, we've had so much going on with the pandemic and trying to make sure that right, but so many good people, all dedicated to making sure this is a healthy and safe place to go to school, all dedicated to the premise that this should be that laboratory of difference making, that not every student will select or choose to participate in the same activities, but our job is to just simply to provide that menu. And everyone can then, within that ecosystem of our university, can find what their passion is, even if they change their major a couple of times, even if the first semester doesn't always go as beautifully as you'd want it to be. We want this to be a place that I have found in the 2 months that I've been here, that you can jump in, you can find good people around you. Not all the answers are here, but that's really important because both as leaders and as faculty members and as staff and as students, sometimes our job is to ask the right questions, not necessarily to provide all the right answers.
How has that been then for your wife and your kids? Has it been a big adjustment for you all?
My two oldest kids, Logan lives in Raleigh, as well as my middle son, Jack, with his wife, Brittany. They live in Raleigh, so we're still a couple hours away from them. And my youngest son, Quentin, he is a student at UNC Charlotte studying architecture. So we've all kind of been in different places, and my wife is here with me, and we settled in a nearby community, and we're looking forward to a post-pandemic world where we can sample the art and the music and the food and the fun places to be. Mostly so far, if it's outside, we might have checked it out, but if it's inside, we're all pretty reticent to do that. But what a wonderful place to live. Proximity to the 15th largest city in the country. This expressway allowing us to get to Charlotte really in a very easy amount of time. Just thrilled to be here.
How old are your sons?
24, 23, and 18.
How was that for your other boys, to dropping them off to college and seeing them become their own and have that college experience that you are so passionate about?
Well, I would say that it's okay when you drop your kid off to college. If you cry, pack the Kleenexes, you might need them. There's no easy way to do it. But, as a parent, our job is to teach our children and to raise our children to be strong and independent, to believe in the things that are important to them, and to be brave enough to tackle new challenges. And college is a new challenge. And it isn't always easy because you're stepping up. All the good work you did in high school, you're stepping up a new level in terms of the academic expectations, but also in terms of the cultural opportunities. College is a place where you find your passion. College is a place where you might find your soulmate. College is a place where you might find lifelong friends that you'll stay together with for the rest of your life. So it's not easy as a parent to drop your kids off and then to trust them. But all the good work you've done in raising them and teaching them what to believe in and passing down that positive recipe knowledge that we talked about earlier, it all comes to a head. I often try to remind myself, what was it like when I was 24? What was I like when I was 22? What was I like when I was 18? And try to imagine, putting myself back into those shoes. So yes, we tend to give a lot of advice to our kids and to our students, and that's okay. But it's also true to remember that sometimes we learn by doing. Sometimes we learn by hearing that good piece of advice. Sometimes we learn by watching the people who are sophomores and juniors and seniors, even if we're freshmen. And sometimes we learn by just getting in the trenches and figuring it out ourselves. And the school of hard knocks is not the only school we want to be a part of, but it's okay too.
All the things you mentioned, by the way, about college, about a place where you found your soulmate. I met my wife here, about a place where you make lifelong friendships. All of those things have been the case for me. A place where you become your own and you find your interest and your passion and forge your own path for who you want to become and the kind of world that you want to live in and leave behind have certainly been true for me. Is there a piece of advice? You also mentioned advice. Is there a piece of advice that you find yourself seemingly giving to students and young people over and over again?
First of all, in college, find your mentor. Find someone who can help you both with the academic challenges you're facing, but also can be someone who can provide you some life lessons going on. A brief comment about our faculty here. We hire faculty and we expect them to be teachers and scholars, but also mentors. Your faculty here at Wingate will have time for you. Now, can you knock on their door and just jump right in like you could if we didn't have a pandemic? Maybe not. But our faculty are interested in your success. They're interested in getting to know you and your aspirations. Yes, they're gonna push you academically. Yes, they're gonna challenge you to reach higher than maybe in some cases you thought you could get. But we are looking for people to come to work here who are interested in that being a component of their life. A lot of our faculty were first-generation college students themselves, so they have a great appreciation of the transition that many of our students are in. So as a student, find your mentor. Maybe it's a staff member. Maybe it's the advisor to a student organization that you'll join. It's possible that it's one of your coaches. Might be a faculty member, and it might even be a faculty member outside of your major. So when you're thinking about taking a class that you're interested in the content for, but you might not want it to be your major, that's okay. You will find your mentor here. And then the most practical advice, be a master at managing your time. I would tell every prospective college student, every current student, start out by treating college like it's a job. In the working world, at the very least, you work from 8 to 5. So if you're one of our students now and you're not up and you're not functioning at 8 o'clock, then you're missing an opportunity to get ahead and stay ahead. So you have classes over the day. Some of them are online. Some of them might be flexed and they're in actual classrooms under social distancing and masking. But the time between your classes from 8 to 5 should be spent studying. It should be spent writing rough drafts. It should be spent getting ahead, reading that textbook, finding a quiet environment. If you're on campus, there are picnic tables literally under every shade tree seemingly on campus. It's an outdoor place for you to go, to crack open your laptop, to look at your textbook and to get ahead. And then email your professors if you have a question. Most professors will start every class, whether it's an online course or whether it's an in-person course, by asking a question. Does anybody have any questions? Raise your hand. Raise your hand and ask one. But if you treat every day from 8 to 5 as college is a career job, and you fill up all that time between classes with studying and preparation and engaging your professors and forming study groups and doing that, I think you'll find pretty often at 5 o'clock, you can close your backpack up and maybe not have that much work to do at night. And that's a pretty good life lesson. Treat it like a job. In a job, you'll be evaluated, your performance will be evaluated, your ability to be promoted, your ability to get a raise will be dependent on what you do 5 days a week from 8 to 5. So the sooner we start that as 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds and 20-year-olds, the better we're prepared, to take on the challenges of the rest of our life. So find a mentor and treat college like a job.
All right, and then in addition to these two pieces of advice, you already gave them the permission to make mistakes, the permission to explore, the permission to change their minds. So it's been a full round piece of advice. So I know you're an avid user of social media and Twitter especially. Why do you think it's such an important tool for you to use to communicate and to put out the ideas that you want to communicate with the rest of the world?
I have an obligation to learn how our students like to communicate, particularly if I want them to learn how to communicate old school style, the way people of my generation might. Have to meet them halfway. And if I will prove that, then maybe I will encourage them, to learn to walk in as well to someone's office and stick out their hand post-pandemic and shake it and say, look someone in the eye and say, hey, I'm so-and-so, I'm in your class. I'd like to talk about content material. So if I can learn their forms of communication, then maybe they'll learn mine, and then we both can learn from each other.
And then maybe to close this amazing conversation, this is a family weekend edition. Do you have closing words for our families and our Wingate family at large?
I'll just say, this is a difficult time right now. In many ways, the country has become divided. We've always been divided over which sports team is the best, or which form of music we like the best, or what's our favorite recipe. But now we've seemingly got really divided over all kinds of things. And I think the only advice I would give to anybody, parent, student, community member, let's take a deep breath. Let's listen to each other. Let's try to provide as much light, but maybe not necessarily as much heat. And it's okay that someone doesn't agree with you. It's okay that someone has a different opinion, be it political or economic or even down to the fact that they listen to different music. It's okay. And when we celebrate each other's differences and when we take a moment to appreciate each other, then I think that makes the world a better place. So if we could all just sort of collectively, myself included, have a little bit more patience and a little bit more grace for each other, I think the world would be a little easier to live in for all of us.
Well, I couldn't pick a better spot to end this conversation. It has been a tremendous pleasure to have you on the show. And hopefully next time we are here, we are talking about that cooking show that you teased out.
There you go. That's
and maybe
right.
we'll actually offer you the platform to launch it. So we can talk. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.